CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Well, let's start in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where all is set for today's inauguration of the newly declared president. Felix Tshisekedi is in capital Kinshasa. Invitations were sent to 20 heads of state to witness the country's first peaceful transfer of power. CGTN's Chris Ochiringa is there for more from Kinshasa. Well, to get more on this, we are now joined by Chris Ochiringa, who is in the DRC capital. Chris, what's the latest from the DRC? Will the president be sworn in at noon local time as scheduled?
Well, many local officials and foreign dignitaries have already arrived at the Palais de la Nation, at the Palace of the Nation in Kinshasa. They are gathered here. We're expecting the president in the next about 30 minutes and President-elect Felix Tshisekedi about 40 minutes from now. The event, the swearing-in ceremony is supposed to start at around 13G. So people are eagerly waiting here, many people cheering. The mood is people are very excited around this day.
Chris, at least 20 heads of state have been invited for this ceremony. Who has arrived so far and who's expected?
Yes, indeed. 20 of them have been invited, but I'm looking at the chairs where the president, the front seats where the president is supposed to be sitting, but I've seen no president yet. We are not sure. We spoke to some officials from the president's office and they could not confirm or deny whether any of them has arrived, but they said, look, just hold on, you'll see them when they come. So we don't know yet which president is here.
And Chris, there were fears of violence in the DRC following the announcement of the presidential winner. Is this still a threat, would you say?
Well, it's not a serious threat as it was immediately after the announcement was made by the Electoral Commission and after the Constitutional Court. Back then, people were planning to protest, but then the police and the army threatened that they will crack down very hard any protest by the Congolese. And so people, I think, are afraid of losing their lives because of this. What most of them wanted was to see a change of government. So even those supporters of Martin Fayulu, who were very disappointed with the outcome, have somehow resigned to the fact that we have a change. So that is the current situation right now.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was Chris Ochiringa there for us in the DRC capital, Kinshasa. Well, Congo's outgoing president, Joseph Kabila, has pledged to hand over power without regret to his successor, Felix Tshisekedi. In a televised address, he applauded his achievements and further called on the people to support the president-elect. The much-anticipated inauguration is expected to take place at the Palace of the Nation. The camps of Kabila and Tshisekedi have denied any backroom deals amidst claims of rigging. Although this is the first peaceful transition of power in the history of the DRC, Tshisekedi is taking over a country that has been marred with decades of deadly regional clashes. It's also one of the least developed countries in Africa, despite its rich natural resources.
Respectueux de la Constitution, je vais...
Respecting the Constitution, I will hand over power without regrets or remorse, because despite the imperfections emanating from all man-made work, Congo has come a long way and rests on a solid foundation today. I invite you to support him in mass, in the same way you supported me during the past 18 years. I call on our youth in particular, future of the country.
Well, some opposition supporters in the country have moved on after their party's election loss. This is despite their flag bearer, Martin Fayulu, calling for protests. they've been engaged in running battles with the police in the past few days. CGTN's Michael Karanja now reports.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is on the verge of the first ever transition of power in its history. However, there are still many groups that have showed dissatisfaction with the election process as well as its results. Among them are the election's first runners-up Martin Fayulu's supporters. Many believe that their candidate was doubt.
Lamuka, en vrai dire, n'était pas préparé.
Lamuka in reality wasn't ready. Even coalition for change wasn't ready. Here we are facing a big problem. The Common Front for Congo political platform has more candidates at the National Assembly and Provincial Assembly. I don't know how our brothers from the Union for Democracy and Social Progress and Coalition for Change are going to lead. I don't know if they are going to cohabit. If they are to partner, I am. We are all troubled by these problems.
Despite their leaders' call to protest and civil disobedience, some supporters like Yadida are choosing to move on.
It is time for me, I think, to move on. Politics is not static. It is always moving. It changes all the time. I think it could change in any case. I pray for it to change so that the two sides from the opposition come together and see how to develop our country.
Even as the president-elect Felix Tshisekedi prepares to officially take over office, his victory is still being put to doubt by many. Allegations of a backroom deal with his outgoing predecessor Joseph Kabila have been leveled against him. Claims of his alleged vote theft have been hovering around him, accusations which his camp has firmly denied. Michael Karanja, CGTN.
Well, joining me in the studio is Dr. Richard Moncrief. He is the Central Africa Director of the International Crisis Group. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, there's been a lot of uncertainty, as we know, about this transition, but it looks like it's set to proceed this afternoon. Do you think it's going to quell all the tension in the country?
For 2 years, uncertainty, and I think it is coming to its final chapter now. There's lots of issues left on the table, lots for the new president to do, but we are actually seeing the end of a process that's taken over 2 years. Will it quell uncertainty? I think it will to some degree, yes. And I think having the result here, a result that many disagree with, but some are happy enough with, let's say, both in country and outside country, will take away some tensions for the moment. But yeah. You say happy enough. I mean, how was this decision reached? You know, describe to us how the agreement or the deal was made. Yeah, well, of course, both the outgoing President Kabila and Felix Tshisekedi, who will be named, who will be sworn in as president today, deny that they made a deal. Everyone knows they did. What happened is that the Kabila's favoured candidate did so badly in the elections that they couldn't piece together a kind of picture that allowed him to come into power. So they were scrambling for a plan B, almost certainly a plan B. Do you know anything about this plan B? Well, the plan B is, we'll let Tshisekedi into power, but we want some agreements from him that he's not going to push too hard against our economic and security interests. That's helped by the fact that the new parliament is really dominated by Kabila's camp. So we've really got a sort of... Tshisekedi won't come into full power. He's got almost to negotiate. Yes, almost a coalition was the word I was looking for, exactly. So as we know, we saw some reluctance from the African Union and the Southern Asia, Africa Development Community to accept Tshisekedi. How do you think he's likely to be received now by these two organisations? Well, firstly, I think he'll ultimately be accepted as the new president. He'll be received. Congo's too big a country. Yeah, well, yeah, but you know, he's not the only president in Africa with a few question marks over him. Congo's a very big country. It's way too important to ignore. And I don't think he should be isolated, by the way. I think, you know, international actors do have to work with him. To come back to the reaction, this has exposed some real weaknesses. In the last 15 to 20 years, the African Union has really tried to construct an idea about what democracy should be, an idea about what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. The events in DRC has seriously challenged that, and you can see that because we've had situations where contradictory communiques have been released by different regional bodies almost on the same day. So the African Union and African powers have been a bit all over the place on this, and there's a lot of mess in the African reaction that's going to have to be dealt with. But they are accepting it, albeit sort of slightly reluctantly, as you say. They've accepted this. Since the Constitutional Court accepted the provisional results as announced by the Electoral Commission around a week ago, all actors both African and Western have fallen into line and said we accept Tshisekedi as the new president.
Well, let's talk a bit more about his presidency. How is he going to unify the country, bearing in mind all of these different groups and factions?
He faces the same challenges as his predecessor, which is that the government and the state don't have great control. There's networks of corruption embedded within the state and embedded within the security forces going right across to violence in the east of the country. He's not very well placed to deal with that because, as we said, he's kind of at the head of a coalition government. So he's got a lot of challenges on his plate, but he's going to have to deal with them because people came to vote for change. And they do see him to some degree as a symbol of change.
So, obviously, a lot to live up to here. We were talking about how we arrived at this decision, and as you say, there were some sort of deals done in the background. How would you describe this as in terms of democracy for DRC?
It's a managed democracy. It's a managed democracy. The vote counts, and I think that's important because I think if it wasn't for the vote, we would have Emmanuel Shadari being voted in. That was Kabila's favoured candidate. So we mustn't say that the vote hasn't counted, but it's a managed democracy. There are so many embedded interests in DRC. It's so complicated that ultimately the elite sit round and they work out what they can work out. It doesn't always include everybody. Of course, some people are excluded and that's dangerous. But ultimately, deals are inevitable in this kind of situation. And what we need to see in DRC is that this handover of power, firstly, that it embeds the principle that presidents don't serve more than 2 terms. That's an encouraging sign and it needs to be embedded in the future. And then there's lots of work to do to improve democracy. It's work in progress. Okay, well, thank you very much. So managed democracy, but as you say, a work in progress. Thank you so much for coming in. That was Dr. Richard Mtukudzi there, the Central Africa Director of the International Crisis Group. We are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including parties to meet for peace talks in Khartoum on Thursday. And in Nigeria, EU election observation team is deployed to the restive northeast.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent and the unique point at which 2 great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lydia Tongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Central African Republic is steering towards a catastrophe unless peace talks starting today succeed. Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council Jan Egeland warns that cycles of violence in the CAR have pushed people to breaking point, and 2.9 million citizens urgently need humanitarian support. Most of the Central African Republic is now controlled by armed opposition groups. The parties from the conflict-ridden nation are meeting for peace talks in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. This is under the auspices of the African Union. The CAR has faced interreligious and intercommunal fighting since 2013. In recent months, violence has intensified and spread. 7 peace deals have been signed in the past 5 years, but not one has had any success. Well, earlier we spoke to Dr. Hassan Hanenji. He is the director of the Horn Institute and is also an expert on the Great Lakes region.
Actually, the current peace deal is in large part an African Union initiative, of course, jointly with the United Nations. Now, African Union is also limited when it comes to actually deployment of forces. It largely relies on the support, especially financial and logistical support of the United Nations to be able to do that. There is a limit with what they can do. However, I think they've been more engaged this time around than they've ever engaged before when it comes to the Central African Republic conflict. It's a false notion to actually say the conflict's religious. We understand that conflict profiteers specifically exploit religion as an effective tool for political mobilization to advance a certain cause. But there are other underlying factors, especially economics and politics. They have a long history of marginalization and political exclusion, but then you also have resources which are not shared equitably. And those are actually more contributing factors because there are many other countries around the continent where Muslims and Christians coexist peacefully, for instance, Tanzania. I think the length of the talks is going to be dependent on the flexibility of the parties to the conflict. If the parties allow and are open, meaning they've reached what we call in conflict resolution a hard stalemate, then they're going to make the process easier. But it also depends on the unity of the United Nations and the international community to demonstrate that this time around we're not going to joke. However, offer carrots and sticks. Carrots to those who are going to cooperate and sticks to those who are not. But then they have to be credible, and that is why I had mentioned earlier that the United Nations need to be united in its voice when it comes to the Central African Republic peace efforts.
To Nigeria now, where the head of the EU election observation team says his team have already been deployed to the northeast. That's where Boko Haram is reportedly plotting to stage attacks to disrupt elections. CGTN's Kelechi Mklem has more.
European Union observers speaking to the media only days after their arrival in Nigeria. The team made up of 40 election observers have already dispatched election monitors to the northeast, where Boko Haram has threatened more attacks to disrupt elections. EU observers citing security concerns in the previous elections stayed away from the northeast.
But in 2015, we weren't able to deploy our observers to the northeast at all because of the security conditions. For now, our observers are travelling up to the northeast as we speak, and will be working in the state capitals at least.
About 30 candidates are contesting for the office of president, but the real race is between President Muhammadu Buhari and opposition PDP's candidate Atiku Abubakar. EU observers have so far met with President Muhammadu Buhari, other political parties, INEC and security agencies, and the head of the delegation has a word of caution to them all.
INEC and security forces need to be seen to work neutrally in all their actions. The second message is I hope that state bodies and political parties all play their part in promoting a fair and peaceful process before, during and after election day.
The 2019 elections would be the 6th since transitioning from military dictatorship to democratic dispensation. Previous elections in Nigeria were fraught with irregularities and violence, and there's rising concern this too could end in some violence. The EU has spent millions of dollars in entrenching democracy in Nigeria over the past decades and will be keen to watch the impact of their efforts. Kelechi Mklem, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, staying in Nigeria, significant emphasis has been put on the need to ensure a positive impact from oil exploration. In West Africa's largest economy, the impact of oil exploration among the host communities has fallen short of expectation. Ago Igun Bariga in Lagos is an area that shows the reality of poverty in the middle of oil wealth.
In the Ago Egun Bariga area in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, there is no road, no electricity, no running water, and no rubbish collection. And now, high grass has blocked access to the water. And for this fishing community, there is no work either.
The challenges and the impact from the dredging activities are substantial. Before, when we used to go fishing, we would make money and we used it to send our children to school. Also now, the drinking water is no longer available. We have to buy it from sellers.
The people of Ago Egun Bariga have made a living from fishing for more than 50 years. But as urbanization and population mushroomed from 300,000 people in 1950 to some 20 million today, everything has changed. They live in makeshift shanties that stretch as far as the eye can see. The Lagos state government has filled vast stretches of water with sand to build much-needed homes, contributing to major changes to the local ecosystem.
We struggle to feed our family because we don't have any more money, nor savings. We want the government to remove the mud so we can fish again to survive.
The fishing boats of Ago Egun have lain idle in the mud for the last 2 years. Last year, Nigeria overtook India as the country with the most number of people living in extreme poverty. The World Poverty Clock estimated that 6 Nigerians slip into extreme poverty every minute. For Ago Egun Bariga, the statistics have faces. 5-year-old children carry heavy jerrycans of water on their heads, scale tilapia in brackish water, or sell dried fish even before they can learn how to count. A clear indication of the task facing the country's new political leaders.
In a situation you don't have money, your children can no longer go to school, you can't access a good hospital, there's no stable electricity. That is abject poverty.
OPEC member Nigeria churns out some 20 million barrels of crude oil every day, but the funds do not reach the people. Between 1960 and 2005, about $20 trillion was stolen from the treasury by public office holders, according to Oxfam. These statistics reflect the reality on the ground. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
The UN Refugee Agency has said that thousands of refugees have been forced to return to Borno State in northeast Nigeria by Cameroonian authorities. A new upsurge of violence in the region forced thousands of people to flee their homes. An estimated 9,000 Nigerians fled across the border after militants attacked the small border town of Ran. At least 14 people were killed there. Cameroon is currently home to more than 370,000 refugees, including some 100,000 from Nigeria. Tributes from all over the continent have been pouring in for popular Zimbabwean singer Oliver Mtukudzi, who died on Wednesday. Tuku, as he was affectionately known by fans, was the country's most successful musician and one of Africa's most unmistakable voices.
Sometimes the term legend is used loosely, but after a career spanning 43 years, during which he produced a staggering 66 albums and won countless accolades, Oliver Mtukudzi is undoubtedly deserving of that title.
I remember myself as a 9-year-old boy jumping up and down the backseat of my father's car while listening to him. Zimbabwe has lost, to me, truly the greatest legend of all time in the music industry, and I feel like, to me, he's irreplaceable.
There's a time when we would not miss his shows between 2004 and about 2012, thereabouts. It was a time of our lives. It was a marvel to attend his shows all over the country, and it's a very, very sad day for Zimbabwe. I think we've lost one of the greatest icons of Zimbabwean music.
Local radio stations have his songs on repeat as the music industry eulogized the late crooner.
We have lost one of the best of us. You know, one of the greatest musicians of our generation. It's very difficult to find an artist who is a musician, who's a good musician, who's a good performer, and who's a good singer and a good songwriter. And I think he epitomized that.
He's one person who took his own resources and developed Bakari Payat Center. We're talking of an artist in Africa who said, I'll build an art center, I don't want donor funding for it. He kept on saying, there is no way we can develop ourselves when we get funded.
Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa has called Mtukudzi a true patriot whose voice has given comfort during difficult times. Opposition leader Nelson Chamisa said he counseled and entertained Zimbabwe and beyond. Despite his international fame, Mtukudzi remained grounded.
He always told us to be humble because he said it's not you who is popular, but it's your piece of art. So if your song is popular, it's not you who is popular, but what you sing. So don't let it stick to your head and think you're bigger than the people you sing for, because they are the people who make you great.
People have said that you can't call yourself a real music lover if you don't have a favorite Oliver Mtukudzi song. While there are many to choose from, my personal favorite is Ndima Ndapedza, which literally translates to, I've finished working my portion of the field, I've completed my task, my job here is done. Oliver Mtukudzi did his brilliantly and unassumingly, and though he may be gone, we will continue to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
To other news now. In Washington, President Trump says he'll deliver his State of the Union address after the government shutdown is over. Trump also said he's not looking for an alternative venue. This comes after a rejection from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She said her chamber would not sign off on the annual speech during the partial government shutdown due to security concerns.
No movement in the right direction. It's becoming very personal now, Mike, between the US President Trump and the Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. Next week, he was due to address the US Congress and the American people in the annual State of the Union speech from the US Congress. It's a highlight of the political calendar here in Washington. Millions watch it on TV. It is a chance for the US President to set the agenda and look presidential. Well, Nancy Pelosi is withdrawing her invitation unless the US government is reopened by next Tuesday. In a letter to Donald Trump, she wrote, I am writing to inform you that the House of Representatives will not consider a concurrent resolution authorizing the President's State of the Union address in the House chamber until the government has opened. Now, the US President responded a short while later at the White House saying this.
We will have a response to Nancy Pelosi in due course. But what she's doing to the American people, what she's doing to our Constitution is a disgrace. And it's not that we have a choice. I don't think we have a choice. We have to make our country safe.
Well, meanwhile, 800,000 federal workers going without pay are getting angrier and louder. As you can see, Wednesday they took over one of the Senate office buildings here, making their anger known, saying they want it all over. Let's take a listen.
We work hard for our money. We work hard to make sure that the American people are safe, that we produce quality work. And for us to get zero pay is a disservice, and it's heartbreaking to not be able to tell my 9-year-old if he's going to have food or be able to do extracurricular activities because I have no paycheck.
And the effect of the shutdown is spreading. FBI officials have been issuing a report saying investigations into drugs and terrorism were failing due to the lack of funding. Meanwhile, security personnel at airports continue not to turn up for work due to financial hardship. And every day we get more and more stories about people going to food banks here in the Washington area. It's quite incredible, Mike.
Yes, a number of federal workers lined up to get food today. Two pieces of legislation. They're going to be voted on Thursday. The U.S. Senate, are they likely to get the government back open?
Unfortunately not, Mike. The first one will be on the proposal put forward by the US President Trump over the weekend. Remember, that was to secure the $5.7 billion he wants for the wall on the Mexican border, but would offer some but temporary concessions for immigrants seeking protected status. Now, Democrats actually rejected this as too little. The second vote will be on a bill that reopens the government for 2 weeks and pays federal workers all the money that they're owed while negotiations on border security continue. That's basically what the Democrats want. Republicans, however, and the US president are likely to reject that too. Meanwhile, the White House is revising upwards the economic impact of this shutdown. A key White House economics official says GDP growth in the first quarter could actually be non-existent if the shutdown continues through the first quarter. So it's really having an impact. No one's blinking, and Washington looks paralyzed here to the country and the world.
A recap of the news making headlines at this hour. Felix Tshisekedi is due to be sworn in as the Democratic Republic of Congo's new president. This ends uncertainty about whether the ceremony would take place. The inauguration is being held at the Palace of the Nation, the seat of the presidency, and is scheduled to start at noon local time. It'll be the first peaceful transition of power in the history of the country, which gained independence from Belgium in 1960. The Central African Republic is steering towards a catastrophe unless peace talks that start today succeed. Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, warns that cycles of violence in the CAR have pushed people to breaking point, and 2.9 million citizens urgently need humanitarian support. Most of the Central African Republic is now controlled by armed opposition groups. The parties from the conflict-ridden nation are meeting for peace talks in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, under the auspices of the African Union. In Nigeria, the head of the EU election observation team says his team has already been deployed to the northeast. That's where Boko Haram is reportedly plotting to stage attacks to disrupt elections there. The team is made up of 40 observers. In past elections, EU observers cited security concerns and stayed away from the northeast. And mourners have gathered at the family home of Zimbabwean musician Oliver Mtukudzi in Harare following his death. The popular singer's career spanned 4 decades and 67 albums. He died on Wednesday, aged 66. In fact, he died on the same day that another popular jazz artist, Hugh Masekele, died last year. And those are the main stories that we're covering for you. Well, we have all the business news coming up for you, including Aliko Dangote's oil refinery expected to create $11 billion per annum market for Nigerian crude. And Ethiopia's Prime Minister announces plans to join the World Trade Organization.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, we begin this news section in Nigeria. President of Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, has disclosed that his petroleum refinery will create $11 billion per annum for the Nigerian crude market. Upon completion, the refinery will meet 100% of daily consumption of all refined products. It's also expected to have a surplus for export. The project includes the world's second largest urea plant, 1,100 kilometers subsea pipeline infrastructure and 480 megawatts of power plant. The project is expected to create no fewer than 100,000 indirect jobs, nearly 30,000 filling stations and 129 depots in Nigeria. Well, staying in the country, Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee recently maintained its long-standing benchmark lending rate at 14%. The committee met for the first time this year to set policy direction for the country ahead of the 2019 elections. CGTN's Kelechi Emekolum reports.
The Central Bank Governor, Godwin Emefiole, outlining the decisions of the Monetary Policy Committee. Members of the committee have been deliberating for the past 2 days. Top on the agenda were curbing a surging inflation, election spending, stabilizing a fragile economy faced with unstable global crude oil price, America's trade war with China, and uncertain Brexit plans. And for the 15th time, the committee agreed to leave all policy parameters unchanged. Benchmark lending rate at 14%, cash reserve ratio at 22.5%, and liquidity ratio at 30%.
In the light of the observed risks confronting the economy, including the global and domestic inflationary pressures, which have intensified the risks of currency depreciation, the MPC was of the view that a losing option was very, very remote. Weighing the balance of its judgment on price stability conducive to growth, the MPC felt that tightening will result in loss of the gains so far achieved, noting that this may drive the banks to reprice assets, thus increasing the cost of credit as well as elevating credit risks in the economy.
Around this time, the committee had targeted a single-digit inflation figure, but widespread floods last year and widespread conflict from communal clashes meant low food production.
The committee observed that the near-term risks to inflation remain the residual impact of flooding on agricultural output, insecurity in parts of the food-producing belts in the country, exchange rate pass-through to inflation due to weakening of oil price, and campaign-related spending towards the 2019 general election.
Nigeria's economy grew by 1.9% last year after emerging from recession. Its growth rate this year is expected to rise to about 2.5%, but it still faces major risks, the most immediate being the general elections next month. A contested outcome could pose a major risk to the growth pattern already shaken by falling crude oil prices. Kelechi Emekolum, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Moving on to Ethiopia now. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has expressed an interest in joining the World Trade Organization. He made the announcement while speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
Addis Ababa is a seat of the African Union and so must lead by example. Our determination explains our active engagement in discussions on the African Continental Free Trade Area and our sense of urgency to finalize Ethiopia's accession to the World Trade Organization. History has demonstrated time and again that neighbors with intimate, rule-based, and diverse trade and economic relations are unlikely to resort to conflict. That is why we believe integration must be viewed not just as an economic project, but also as crucial to securing peace and reconciliation in the Horn of Africa.
Well, let's cross over now to Davos in Switzerland, where UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is making a special address.
To do it from a lectern, he shows that he will speak to us off the cuff, sitting, and then I'll try to come up with some questions. Secretary General, floor is yours, and welcome to Davos.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, my dear friend. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. If I had to select one sentence to describe the state of the world, I would say we are in a world in which global challenges are more and more integrated and the responses are more and more fragmented. And if this is not reversed, it's a recipe for disaster. Now, if one looks at global politics and geopolitical tensions, the global economy, And the mega trends, climate change, movement of people, digitalization, the truth is that they are more and more interlinked, interfering more and more with each other. And indeed, the problems are global, but the responses are fragmented. Looking at the global economy, we are now growing still with a relatively acceptable GDP growth, 3.1 last year, but slowing down. And everybody agrees that there are dark clouds in the horizon and that there are risks. And if one looks at the risks, there is really an interrelation of those risks with all the other aspects of the global international relations. The first risk is probably trade tensions, and trade tensions are today essentially a political problem. A second risk, of course, related to the debt that is much higher than in the last financial crisis, and which is limiting the capacity to respond to any potential emerging crisis, and also limiting the capacity of states to implement the projects that would be necessary to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But in any case, it remains essentially an economic dimension of the problem. Then we have the instability in financial markets, and there clearly it's a matter of confidence, so political events have an influence on that. And if one looks at the shutdowns and the Brexit saga, there is a certain sentence that political systems do not know exactly what to do when dealing with problems that have strong economic impacts. And so that is a factor of lack of confidence, and a factor of lack of confidence creates or increases instability in the markets. And then the climate risk. And I think the climate risk is the most important systemic risk for the near future. I believe we are losing the race. Climate change is running faster than what we are. And we have this paradox. The reality is proving to be worse than what science has foreseen, and all the last indicators show that. We are moving dramatically into a runaway climate change if we are not able to stop it. And at the same time, I see the political will slowing down. These were technologies on our side, and when we see more and more the business community ready to respond in a positive way, and the civil society more and more engaged. But the political will is still very slow. And we see lots of subsidies to fossil fuels, we see carbon pricing in a very limited way, and we see many still putting into doubt whether climate change is a threat. But in my opinion, it's the most important global systemic threat in relation to the global economy. And then we have aspects that are more complex. But it's true that globalization, with all its fantastic improvements in the world and the technological progress linked to it, has increased inequality at country level, especially inside countries. And there's people that was left behind, people, sectors, regions. That has created a sense of frustration in the rust belts of this world, and this has been a factor of reducing confidence, trust in governments, in effective strategies in dealing with economic problems. And then the fact that growth has been uneven, and that we have a number of least developed countries in which per capita growth is stagnant. This is creating development gaps that are a factor of instability and of conflict, linked to other violations of human rights and other aspects. And so there is this unevenness in growth is a factor of potential increase in conflict. And countries that are able to solve conflicts always at risk of going back into those conflicts. And then if we look at the political megatrends, it is clear for me that we are witnessing a multiplication of conflicts, more and more interrelated and more related to a threat of global terrorism, but at the same time the response is more and more fragmented. We no longer live in a bipolar or unipolar world, but we are not yet in a multipolar world. We are in a kind of a chaotic situation of transition. Power relations became unclear. The relationship between the three most important powers, Russia, the United States and China, has never been as dysfunctional as it is today, and this is true for the economy, but it's also true in the paralysis of the Security Council in many very important aspects. We see the emergence of medium-sized powers that start to be very influent in different scenarios. It's impossible to look at what happened in Syria without recognizing the role of Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and we can do the same in other conflicts around the world. So power relations becoming unclear, fragmentation of actions, impunity and unpredictability prevailing. And when you say, and you said, and it's right, that we are probably moving into a multipolar world, let's have no doubts. Multipolarity, it might be a factor of equilibrium, but it's not necessarily a factor of peace and security. We had Europe before the First World War, a multipolar Europe, but in the absence of multilateral mechanisms of cooperation and governance, we had the First World War. So it is very important to recognize the importance of multilateral mechanisms. And if I would go on with the megatrends that I mentioned, climate change, the movement of people that today became a central political problem, or the questions related to digitalization, we would see in all of them more and more linkage between politics, economy, technology, movement of all these situations more and more interlinked, and the enormous difficulty of the international community at country level and at global level to respond in a global way. And this brings us to the center of the debate today. I am a multilateralist. I am deeply convinced that there is no other way to deal with global challenges but with global responses and organized in a multilateral way. But I think that it's not enough to say this. And it's also not enough to vilify those that disagree with these and just consider them as nationalists or populists or whatever. I think we need to understand the grievances and to understand the reasons why, the root causes of why large sectors of the population in different parts of the world today disagree with us. And we need to address those root causes, and we need to show these people that we care for them. And the problem is that to a large extent, political establishments and international organizations during large periods let these people be left behind in those, as I mentioned, rust belts of this world, and did not show that they cared. And people would think, oh, politicians, they just take care of their own interests and the elections and whatever, and we are here, we are abandoned, we don't see a future, our jobs are lost, we can't rebuild our lives, we feel insecure with everything that has happened. We need to be able to address the concerns of these people, to talk to them and to act in relation to them. And for that, I think we need a multilateralism that is simultaneously networked to make sure that we are able to address complex challenges. Very important for the UN to be in close cooperation, as it is today, with the World Bank and the IMF, but also with all regional organizations, the World Trade Organization. We need to work together. There is no way we can do isolated responses to the problems we face. They are all interlinked, and it needs to be an inclusive multilateralism. It needs to be a multilateralism in which not only states are part of the system, but in which more and more the business community, the civil society, the academia, they are all part of the way to analyze problems, to define strategies, to define policies, and then to implement them. There is no way government to the fourth industrial revolution or can deal with migration. We need more and more a multilateralism that also is able to incorporate the contribution of all these other sectors, and I think the World Economic Forum has an absolutely vital role to play on this. And if you ask me what are the priorities for me in the UN for this at the present moment, I would raise three. First, to demonstrate to all those that today are not in favor of multilateralism that we care for them, to demonstrate to all those that are feeling that they were left behind that our ideas, our policies, our programs aim at solving their problems or helping them to solve them. And that is the reason why we try to look at the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals as an inclusive process to leave no one behind. And there, a huge cooperation is necessary, obviously, with the business community and with member states in general and with the civil society, but clearly to make people understand that it's not an abstract debate on global development. This is something linked to the concerns that people have about the future of their jobs, about the future of their communities, and this is even more important when we know the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. Second concern, to tell people clearly, look, we understand that for you, We in the UN, we have problems of bureaucracy, we have problems of being too heavy. We need to reform, and we are reforming. We have launched a very substantial, robust program of reform aiming at simplification of procedures, decentralization. I just sent 200 letters to 200 managers giving them powers they never had in relation to staff management, budget, procurement, and other aspects to make them take decisions closer to the point of delivery, closer to the people we deal with. And then transparency and accountability, that is essential to prove taxpayers that they have value for money in what we do. And then the third aspect that for me is a priority is to show the added value of the United Nations. And there I must say, I think we are doing things. I mean, look at December last year. We were able to bring together the international community in Katowice. Everybody thought Katowice would be a failure. It was not. We managed to approve the work program of the Paris Agreement. It doesn't solve the problem of, we need more ambition. More ambition in mitigation, that was not solved there. But it was possible to bring together countries that were in a totally different position to at least agree on the basis to move forward. Nobody believed that it was possible to have an agreement, a first agreement in Yemen. It was possible. It will be very difficult to move, but we are pushing for a surge in diplomacy for peace, and many other situations have been improving in recent times. South Sudan is looking better. Ethiopia, that is not our merit, it's the merit of the Prime Minister, has done a fantastic step forward in relation to Eritrea. So a surge in diplomacy for peace, I think, is something that we are proving, that we are there, that we are doing things that are necessary, and that nobody can replace the UN in this work. A second aspect that I would like to underline on this is the fact that in the humanitarian world, the UN still represents more than half of the humanitarian aid distributed around the world. We supported last year 100 million people in 40 countries, mobilizing $15 billion US. And I think that the work the UN does is absolutely irreplaceable. And looking at world would be, the tragedy would be much bigger without this work. So I think we have an added value that is proven. But it's clear we need to accelerate in 2019. Accelerate in the surge in the diplomacy for peace, accelerate in relation to climate change, and we'll have a summit in which we want more ambition in mitigation, in adaptation, in finance, and in innovation, and to make governments understand that they are not doing enough, and to mobilize as much as possible the business community and